If you enjoy the Songs and Stories podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes. Be sure to visit bigislandmusic.net to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content. Now, back to the show.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Behind the Curtain event for Hair. My name is Justin John Moniz. I serve as Executive Director of Hawaiian Performing Arts Festival and also as Music Director and Conductor for this production of Hair. I'm joined by two dear friends and colleagues of mine. We've got Lee Summers, who's from New York City, on faculty with me at NYU, and Director of the production. And we're delighted Lee is here. I'll give Lee a round of applause. And then we've got Debra McGee back for another season with us as our choreographer and movement specialist. So just by a show of hands, how many of you have attended one of the Behind the Curtains already this summer? Okay, so a number of you. So this is really about 25 minutes for us to share a little bit about the piece, the programming, some of the choices with the material, and then really an opportunity for this to be a dialogue. So we want to open it up for questions and be able to talk with you about the things that you would like to know a little bit more about, hence going behind the curtain, yeah? So I just want to start out by saying that this piece, I believe, is one of the most difficult pieces we've ever programmed here at HPAF for a number of reasons. Of course, the challenge of producing a rock musical, which is something we've never done before, and that comes with a very long list of challenges, but also, for those of you who know the piece and know Hair, it's a very sensitive piece, and there are a lot of thematic issues involved in putting this on its feet and producing it in a time that there are a lot of, let's say, discussions and heated debates about some of the topics that you'll even see before you today. The really fascinating thing about it, though, and sort of disappointing in some ways, is that many of the issues we were facing in 1968 are a number of the issues we're still talking about in 2022, which makes it a reason to program it and a reason for the stories to be heard. And I really am a big believer in programming art that makes people get a little bit uncomfortable and makes people think a little bit about their views on things, and that really historically has been some of the most powerful and influential pieces of art. You know, there were protests at many of the opera premieres back in Europe in the early days. There were also protests here in the United States around pieces, and a lot of uprising even surrounding this piece. And I want to allow my colleagues to talk a little bit about their experiences and you know, their history. I will say, really cool for a moment, we had Sherm Warner with us. Many of you may know who Sherm is, previously involved here at the Kahulu Theater on the board. And Sherm visited us both last night and during our final dress rehearsal. Sherm was the production stage manager for the sit-down production of Hair in Las Vegas. At the same time, Elvis and Ike and Tina Turner were playing. Sent me the picture of the marquee, and there's Hair right up there with those folks. And was the stage manager on the first national tour and shared with us some really fascinating things about the piece and the challenges at the time. So I'm really excited that we're able to do this here at HPAF and able to present this story. Of course, the music, there are a lot of bops, a lot of things that you'll know, tunes you'll recognize, I'm sure, and want to sing along to as we progress through the afternoon. But more than anything else, it's a piece that really has a place in the musical theater canon, and I think a place right now on our stages, and an important piece of the puzzle here as we move forward towards a brighter tomorrow. So I'd like to pass it over to Lee to talk a little bit about the piece and maybe just share some of your thoughts and experiences putting this together.
Thank you. Justin Moniz, please. Aloha, everybody. You guys are so lucky to have this guy in town. He is masterful. I mean, you're about to see something pretty cool, and all the ingredients are because Justin invited us all to be here, so just wanted to put that out there. Wow, you said a lot. You said a lot of cool things just now, and I'm just going to piggyback on a couple of them. One of the things that Justin spoke about was how some of the people from the original, like the gentleman who was here the other day, sort of resurfaced. And I found that, and I find often when I'm doing a new piece, I try to find my way into the piece by researching the authors and to find out what was in their mind, what were they trying to do. And so since we've started doing the piece, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, but I was just going to drop some names real quickly. My friend tells me that if I wrote my autobiography, it would be called Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, or Name Drops Keep Falling on My Head. So Melba Moore, anybody know that name? Some kind of way out of the blue, she posted on my page the other day. One of our cast members, their voice teacher was in the original cast of Hair. All of these people are surfacing, and I think, and I was told, and I think it's pretty much true, with James Radol of one of the original authors. As many of you know, he passed away in June. So I believe this is the first production of Hair since he passed away. And so he was one of those authors who I researched, and I wanted to find out what was going on in their heads. And so what I found out was they were two young actors. They were in a Broadway show. I think I talk about it in my little director's note. They were in a very bad Broadway show that lasted like 2 days, but the universe brought them together. And James had always wanted to write a Broadway musical, so he ended up writing with the other gentleman whose name just flew out of my head, but it's in the playbill. And a series of coincidences happened. They started writing the show. They added the composer about 2 years later. They had all these lyrics, and he came along and just put it all beautifully to music. At that time, hippies, or as they put it in some of the interviews, white men were wearing long hair for the first time. And of course, the civil rights movement was at its height, and women's liberation, if you will, was happening. And so the young people were like, enough of the way that you want to hand us the world. And that's what they wrote about in Hair. So what you get is all of these brilliant expressions of the things that the youth of that day that were dissatisfied with. And I think one of the ways that the authors approached writing Hair is by just listing things off. And so you'll find some of the lyrics sound like lists of this and that, and lists of this and that. What's wrong with this? What do I want? What do I have? What do I not have? What do they call black people? And this composer came along and put that to music. So that craft-wise, Hair is a very unique piece. And I remember thinking, because I've done a Broadway show a long time ago, and I thought it was like the best Broadway show ever. But working on Hair and going inside of the mechanics of Hair, I have really found a new kind of favorite Broadway show, because this show is pretty powerful. And the critics at the time, really critiqued it about structure. But there's something inherent in it, something magical inside of this piece, and not to mention the subject matter. I could talk for 3 days.
Okay, now.
So you better snatch this mic away from me. Guys, it's such a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for coming out, and I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. All right?
Thank you, Lee. And that Broadway production Lee was talking about, you may have heard of Dreamgirls. That was the production that Lee was a part of. So we're delighted to have Lee this summer and sharing all of his expertise. I want to pass the mic over to Debra to talk from a movement perspective. It's a really important part of the piece. Not only is it a musical, but there are so many intricacies and I would say challenges in terms of navigating space and personal space and intimacy. And this is something that we had to work through in the process. So Debra, can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
The musical, the production itself has 50 musical pieces total. Mm-hmm. And we chose to do 48 with movement. So in a festival format, it is rapid fire, get it done, and in a tactful way. And in my own research, of course, I started with Twyla Tharp's Hair production, the film. Can I see who's seen Twyla's choreography? Okay, outstanding. Now, if you look at the credits, they're pretty much Twyla Tharp's company. They're professional dancers. In fact, 2 of my college professors were listed in there. So actually, when you contacted me, I was like, bet, I got this. I basically trained Hair. But long story short, deeper dive into it, no, it's not even about that. It's about getting the organic movement from each individual body, because every body is different. So when we created the movement, we built a vocabulary that was attuned to everybody, so everyone could do the movement, but in their own sense, which kind of parallels the original choreographer, because she also did something similar, where it was a very natural movement is what they called it, and later found that she was one of the first people to bring hip-hop to a concert dance stage. It was not Rennie Harris, it was her, which again is kind of a non-traditional thing to bring to the stage. So in light of the piece and the sensitive material, we did spend time at the front of the rehearsal to talk about triggers that people had, to make sure they're feeling comfortable with touch and closeness, especially in these times that we're having here. And it worked. I think as a team, we successfully created a very safe space for everyone to get into their bodies, to learn the movement, to be creative with it, and express themselves. So it was a job well done.
Thank you, Deborah. So what we'd like to do, as I mentioned, is make this a dialogue. So we want to open it up for some questions regarding some of the things that we've discussed, or perhaps not, if there are any questions from folks in the audience regarding the process.
Come on.
Oh, there's a hand back there.
In the back.
How much more compared with other productions did you have to do historical lessons, contact setting with the performance?
Yeah, so the question was, in comparison to other productions, how much time did we spend doing like historical discussions? Is that right? Yeah, you want to talk about
Sure.
that, Lee, from a director's
Sure.
perspective?
Yes, well, clearly, Hair was set in 1968, 1969. All of the actors fortunately, had come pretty much, had sort of emerged themselves in knowledge of that. And the costumes, obviously. The talks that we had, not only piggybacking off of what Deborah said in terms of how do we translate that kind of free love, free movement, touch, intimacy, language, triggering words, I'm just again piggybacking off of Deborah. We had conversations about that. In terms of the historical accuracy, that's been an ongoing conversation because we have clearly used the script as our recipe, but at the same time, when you put these things on their feet, sometimes you have discoveries. I'll give you one, and well, no, that'll give away too much to do with the show. I want to tell you, but I don't want to ruin your experience today. But let's just say there's some specificities throughout the piece, visually and in terms of how the characters interact, that we've definitely talked about what was different about then than it is now, and how can we best represent that. And mainly it's in how they interact with one another. And even the characters that represent the quote unquote establishment, what was okay then. There are some moments where something that might have been okay back in 1969 simply is not okay in 2022. And so when those moments would surface from the script, we'd examine them, have conversations about them. Justin put this very beautifully one day when we were talking about what we should discard historically and what we should hold on to. He said, you guys have to remember, doing this piece is like doing a museum piece. And sometimes if you go to a museum, you're going to see things that are not so pretty that represent the past. So with that kind of attitude, we try to marry the authenticity of the history of the piece, and at the same time, when we needed to massage things that just didn't feel right in 2022, we massaged them. But we didn't cut a lot, we massaged them, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Great. Great. Thank you for that question. Other questions? Yes, over here, Duncan.
I was a Saturday night viewer, and it was a wonderful show.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could spend a few moments about the visual effects of the backstage.
Projection.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for being a loyal audience member and supporter. We brought to us here last night and is back with us today. Yeah, so what you'll see today is a lot of projection design on the upstage site behind us. And those elements, those visual elements will help support telling the story throughout the piece. There is a wonderful designer we've had with us for a number of years by the name of Brittany Miranda. And many of you who have seen HPAF productions have seen her work over the last few years. She really helps to take, the libretto and really give it life and give it another dimension, if you will. And so I think while we would say that the concept for the production is pretty simple because the material is so loaded. I think I was saying to somebody, it's sort of like Sondheim. You have to hear it 3 or 4 times to really catch it all. It's so wordy. And in some ways, it's sort of about the experience, right? So what we talked about with Brittany and Lee, I'm sure you can weigh in on these conversations, is how to put that into a visual component as to help aid the storytelling and to take us, through that process.
Absolutely. Yes, Brittany is a genius, the person who designed the projections you're going to see today. And she's a wonderful storyteller. And as Justin said, you've seen her work in other productions. We talked a lot about the things that Deborah and I, all of us were just talking about in this gentleman's question. How can we utilize the visuals to help take us to the historical places we needed to go? So you'll see some visual things that hopefully you'll see them and then you'll absorb them and hopefully you'll continue to focus on what the actors are saying. But you're going to get sort of like a smorgasbord of storytelling. You're going to see visuals that are pleasing to you. You're going to hear some amazing singing, and you're going to hear some and hopefully some wonderful acting. And so yes, I don't know if we've answered your question about the visuals, but they're very deliberate and created by a very talented designer.
Great. Other questions? We've got a few more minutes.
Say a hand over here.
Yes, Steve.
I was wondering if you recall or if you know, at the time the original production came out, do you know how the counterculture reacted, how the real hippies reacted to a play about them?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. So the question Steve had is, what was the reaction amongst the hippies during the time that the piece was created? And I don't know, maybe we can speak a little more to that specifically, but what I can say and what I just learned the other day when we had our guest here with us is Sherman talked about when this piece toured and went to certain cities. I mean, there were riots. There were folks when they took it to Indiana. They were in the town, in the home of the Ku Klux Klan, and they were burning crosses, outside the venue. I mean, these are the types of things, the types of uproar and resistance. So that was, really insightful, and I think it just goes to put this into perspective for us as folks who didn't live, through that experience, at least personally. So that was something that was really eye-opening for me. In terms of hippies, do you want to talk about that, Lee?
Well, I can only.
Your perception of it?
Well, I clearly wasn't there. I may look like I was there with the white hair, but at any rate, I've in my travels and my research, there's a character named Lita in the script, and Lita's she's about 70 something now, and we got on the phone together, and I was asking her a question similar to yours, and her statement was more like, we were just doing our thing. And in terms of being in the show, and she spoke about the free love element, and she said that sometimes the cast would go through, they'd meet people in the audience, and who knows what would go on there. She told me that they had code words. This is not specific to your question. I only have sort of backstage answers to your question in terms of the culture. That they had code words when the fire department would come to the theater, and they had a name. Somebody had red hair in the cast. Let's say their name was Johnny McWhorter. The stage door person would go, guest for Johnny McWhorter, guest for Johnny McWhorter at the stage door. And that meant put all your weed away, put all your cocaine away, put your clothes on, stop having sex. The fire department is here. So it was really, all of those stories that you've heard about the crazy, zany culture that went on stage was pretty much true. And to Justin's point, I can't really speak to what that culture, how they received the show, but I think there's not been a show, like when that gentleman came from the Vegas production, it just dawned on me, and another friend pointed out to me that Donna Summer, of course, we knew she was in Germany, so Donna Summer recorded Love to Love You Baby while in the German cast of Hair. Las Vegas company, companies all over the place. So I think that whether or not the establishment, if you will, got on board with the show, it was a runaway hit. It spoke of the culture. And so not only were the hippies on board, but the Broadway elitists were on board as well. Everybody got on board with hair, except those people who were anti, young people, so to speak.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was really fascinating to me was that, of its time, it was sort of similar to Hamilton. And I say that because Hamilton is one of those pieces right now that has so many sit-down productions around the country. And in order for a piece to have a sit-down production outside of New York or Chicago or outside of the context of a tour, it has to be a considerable piece within the musical theater canon with a huge following. And there were sit-down productions of Hair across the country, separate from the tour. So I think it just speaks to how the piece was received and how many people really related to that experience or shared that experience in one way or another. Was there another hand? Yes, over here.
What challenges and opportunities arose?
Movement-wise, being that half the show they're high or stoned or having sex was a bit of a challenge, but we had multiple conversations about it. We weren't asking them to go drop acid and come into rehearsal, which may have been what they did back in the day, but rather thinking about how your body can move in a certain way while you're feeling a certain emotion or with a certain person, say your partner, you're dancing with your partner as opposed to dancing in a group. So I felt like the main challenge was getting them to bring it into their own bodies in that sense and feel comfortable with it, because it doesn't necessarily feel that organic to act like you're stoned. Really. It's actually rather challenging. And then the sexual part of it, again, is to feel comfortable in your own body and then to be close to somebody. And then for us, the challenge is to make sure it's not over the top and tacky and you don't want to look at that, but to have the movement look sensual and real without being over the top. So that was another challenge, and we worked through it, definitely. Do you want to say something?
That's great, Deborah. Thank you. And one thing I will say is, the relevancy to 1968, 2022, where a lot of these artists have grown up, many of whom are in college right now here on the stage tonight, they're part of Black Lives Matter protests. They're sort of living a parallel in some ways in terms of equality and women's rights. And there are a lot of issues still that haven't been fully resolved, if you will, that a lot of the current generation is advocating for. And so while it's not necessarily an identical experience, in some ways there is a pretty great parallel to some of the issues that that generation in the 60s had been facing, and similar to what the generation now at the same age is facing. So that was a great question. Thank you.
I have one little thing to add to that. Yes, for instance, language. That's been an interesting thing for us to tackle with these, particularly with people who were not born. And obviously, Hair is a piece that mentions the N-word several times. And when I was first asked to do the piece, I remember thinking, I can't picture myself in a rehearsal hearing the N-word over and over and over and over again. But this is why I go and dig into the authors, because what I found out in my research was that Hair, not only were the authors trying to this lovely lady's point, trying to articulate what everyone was feeling during that time, they also had a real sensitivity to what was going on in Black culture. And they infused the show with so many people of color that the music has a gospel cotton fields kind of flavor to it when it needs to have it. It's basically a protest, and it's sort of like they were trying to make things, put it like almost Brechtian, put it in your face and make you uncomfortable with it. And that's somewhat of the whole style of the piece. So languaging from people who weren't born versus the people from 1968, some of those words just cannot and could not come out of our cast's mouths because they are too aware, too present, and so we struggled with that. Those were some of the challenges. How do we have younger people say things that they know are wrong to say? Yes.
Why is it called hair?
Why is it called?
I have a thought. Yeah. Well, in my research about the authors, I remember in one interview where they were talking to the main two, and they were like, and I think I said it already, this was the first time historically, say in the 20th century, that white men had grown their hair long. And then black people also had big afros. To your point again, I love that you spoke, by the way, that with everything that you said, it was a rejection of what was normal. If my hair has to be short to fit in, then it's going to be long. And everybody was either not wearing it. Everything was non-conformist, and including the hair. And the hair was the first thing that you would see. And this is what was going on while they were writing the show. So they were like, some kind of way they stumbled on hair. That is not the actual story of why it's called hair, but that's my interpretation of it, because everybody has hair and everybody is non-conformist in the piece. I hope that helps maybe.
Can I talk about hair?
Yes.
And also, just to add in, our amazing, amazing costume designer, Michelle Hartman, offered a suggestion to the cast to grow their hair out. Do not shave, like let it go to really encompass that character. And a lot of them have, and we went back and forth with certain characters and how we wanted their hair to actually look on the stage, and we came up with some really pristine looks. So it's definitely gonna feel as if it were 1968.
Well, I think we're coming up on our time here. We have just about a minute before we have to wrap. We do have to vacate the house so they can disinfect prior to the performance. But I want to thank my colleagues Lee and Deborah for your collaboration on this project.
Thank you.
I also want to give a shout out to all of our designers, Brittany and to Michelle. And I mean, we have so many incredible people on this project, to Matt for the lights. I mean, it's really been a tremendous effort putting this piece on its feet. And we're just delighted that you've come to let the sun shine with us this afternoon. So take a short break and we'll see you back here in just a bit. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Songs and Stories podcast. Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. We'll see you next week on Songs and Stories. Aloha.